Okay, so I thought just to celebrate Guru Purnima that I would bring a different approach, maybe show you a different side of Jupiter, a side maybe that would be controversial, a side that might be deemed as wrong, even, um, and something that I think we need to talk about. It's kind of like the shadow side of Guru. You know that saying, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. So these charts that I'm going to show you have some perhaps dark shadows, but we all have, and I think we have to recognize that when we look at any charts, that we're all one in another way, and that we might look at individuals and think that they have something wrong with them, quote unquote, but we all have something we can look at in ourselves. So this topic of Jupiter exalted and retrograde is a bit of a controversial one in astrology because there are a lot of different opinions about it. That does it make it stronger or does it make it weaker? And I'm going to show you in the example charts that I have that it's perhaps both. And this is also another thing I think that is helpful in astrology when we approach any chart, that we have to always keep an open mind about many different ways things can express themselves. And instead of looking at it as this or that, we can look at it as all of that potential. So let me just show you some charts here. But first, I just want to say that my take on this is that Jupiter exalted retrograde behaves as if it's also debilitated. And again, I will show you in the examples of how this is the case. But then the question would come, why would an exalted planet behave debilitated? If you think about the Graha Drishti, the planet is looking at the opposite sign. So if it's exalted, it looks at its debilitated sign anyway. But a lot of astrologers believe that when it's retrograde and exalted, it behaves as if it's in the debilitated sign. And you'll find this from a lot of astrologers in India. I've heard this a lot. So, but there are different opinions about it. Like I said, that's why it's controversial. But why would an exalted planet desire to be debilitated? And so again, I'll show you in the examples, it's not that somebody would consciously desire it, perhaps even, or would admit to wanting something of the lower characteristics maybe of Jupiter, but it is still there and it has to be acknowledged. It's easy to see when a planet is debilitated when it has a Graha Drishti on the opposite sign exalted. So it wants to be in a better situation than it's in. If it's debilitated, it desires to be exalted, to be in a better situation. That's obvious. But how it works the other way is not always so obvious. One simple example would be if you have Jupiter Guru in exaltation in Cancer, and there are a lot of high ideals, then maybe it's a desire to bring those high ideals down to earth in Capricorn and systematize them and practically implement your wishes. So that's maybe one way of looking at it. But here are the case studies. Joe Biden, Sinead O'Connor, Joe Biden, Joe Biden, Sinead O'Connor, the Irish singer who died recently. I'm from Ireland, by the way. I'm recording this from Dublin. So I thought I'd bring in someone Irish. Elizabeth Taylor, you know her, I'm sure, as an actress. Leo Varadkar, the previous Irish Prime Minister, who's also, his heritage is from India. So I thought I'd bring in the Irish-Indian connection there. All of these people have Jupiter exalted and retrograde. And also, they all have Scorpio Lagna. So it kind of makes it easy to see, is this true if we take these 4 examples and they all have Jupiter exalted in the 9th house but retrograde? Is it therefore behaving as if it's in Capricorn, the 3rd house? So we shall see. So this is Joe Biden. I'm sure you know his chart by now. He just left. Well, he didn't leave the presidency. He's still president. But he seems to be taking a back seat now. So Jupiter is as you can see, exalted in Cancer, behaving as if it's in the third house Capricorn. That's this sort of theory here. And is it true? And maybe you could say that it is true if we look at, how this is playing out in his life. He did actually become president at the very end of Jupiter Mahadasha. So that was Jupiter Dasha and then Rahu Bhukti. Rahu is very prominent in the 10th house and all of that, and it's in the rising sign in the Dashamsha in the career chart. So you can see that Rahu, Jupiter could have brought him that. But he's now in a Saturn Dasha, and Saturn, I thought really from the beginning of Saturn that he would take a step back, but really it was more that he was, as many people now say, he was cognitively challenged in the last while because of Saturn's influence. But if we consider that Jupiter is behaving as if it's in Capricorn, debilitated, and Jupiter in this chart rules the 5th sign, which is to do with intelligence, we could say that this person is also displaying these traits of being cognitively impaired. So that's maybe one way of looking at it. It's also conjunct Pluto if you use the outer planets, so that's adding another spin. Jupiter-Pluto tends to bring in hidden wealth. I'm not going to say any more about that. But there are many other things you can bring in here in the analysis. I don't have time to go through all of the aspects, but you can look at the Rashi Drishti as well, the sign aspects from Saturn and so on. I think Saturn's aspect on Jupiter, if Jupiter also behaving as if it's in Capricorn, Saturn sign, again, it shows that kind of cognitive impairment. But also, more practically, more obviously, his son, the 5th Lord, Jupiter, his son was seen to be, he was arrested and was charged with criminal behavior. That doesn't seem to me like an exalted Jupiter. Even though we're seeing Jupiter exalted, it's retrograde, remember. So it's behaving as if it's debilitated. It's behaving like it's in the 3rd house, which, by the way, if you use this other technique of Marna Karakastana, where you put planets in certain houses where they don't function well, and Jupiter in the 3rd house, in all of these cases I'm showing you, is going to be further impaired, further challenged, because Jupiter and the 3rd house don't go together. 3rd house is about sex, it's about money and war, and all of those things don't fit with Guru. I think everyone would agree with that. So it definitely challenges Jupiter. And so when we think about Hunter Biden, his son, displaying the debilitation of Jupiter maybe more obviously, we could also see that both are true, that he has an exalted Jupiter, it is exalted, and he is seen to be as a very well, even considering just his stepping back from going for the next term of president, everybody's saying now how he's doing this for the good of his party. He's not thinking selfishly. All of those things may be true, but you can question a lot about his motives with this Jupiter. And I don't think I have ever seen a chart for a politician that didn't have an afflicted Jupiter and a prominent Rahu. You have to have a strong Rahu to be a politician, I think. So anyway, we could always say more and more about Joe Biden, but that's one example. Let me go to the next one. Elizabeth Taylor. This is another side of Jupiter behaving as if it's debilitated, though it's exalted. And again, behaving as if it's in the 3rd sign, which is to do with sex. But moreover, I think for Elizabeth Taylor, it was more to do with love and romance. So she married 11 times to 10 different people. So she married one person, same person twice. It's a lot to do with this Venus-Rahu combination, of course, in her 5th house, but that is ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter is aspecting by Graha Drishti here. You can see that. So the fact that Jupiter rules Rahu and Venus, and in a sense, Rahu is behaving like Jupiter, right? You can see this kind of excessive longing and desire and all of these relationships. Saturn is opposite Jupiter as well, of course. So if it behaves as if it's in Capricorn, then there's a Saturn strong influence on Jupiter as well. So by the way, just for, clarity, Jupiter obviously rules the husband and for a woman more specifically, but in this case, it is about the 5th Lord and love and romance. And I think, this term applies hopeless romantic. I don't know if she ever said that about herself. This is just a phrase when people say someone's a hopeless romantic. Even that word hopeless, you would say is a Jupiter debilitated word. It's not an exalted Jupiter. Hope is Jupiter. But anyway, that's maybe another expression from the kind of more sexual side of things, from the more, relationship side of things, Jupiter behaving as if it's in a weak place. And yet it still is an exalted Jupiter, is what I want to say. It's both. She had many husbands, but then she had many divorces. Exalted and debilitated, you might say. Okay, so the next one then is more tragic, you might say. Sinead O'Connor, the Irish singer who died a few months ago. And she has maybe more of an extreme expression of this exalted Jupiter in Cancer, like it's debilitated in Capricorn, because of her relationship with religion. And so now we're in another topic, obviously related to Guru, Jupiter, religion. So she was a very outspoken singer. And at one point, she even became a priest. So there's that side of it. She was a very religious person, and she ended her life actually having converted to Islam. So she started off Catholic, she became a priest, but her most famous incident in her whole life, and that turned really her whole life around, was that she got up on stage and she ripped apart a picture of the Pope. And from then on, she was dismissed, really. I mean, she was booed off stage. People hated her at that point. And she was later in life, she said that she was so thankful for that, because she didn't want to be in the music industry like she was. But this clearly shows this exalted Jupiter, this need to connect with religion and faith and belief. And at the same time, like, it's debilitated, like literally ripping up a picture of the Pope. So the other tragic thing that happened just before she died is that her son took his own life, the fifth lord again, Jupiter. He took his own life a few months before she herself died. And we don't know, it wasn't made public how she died, but that she died a few months after her son died. So a lot of people just said she died of a broken heart. And you might say that's a lot to do with Jupiter also, the fifth lord. And like I said, she did convert to Islam later in life. So she had a lot of ups and downs with her faith and religion. So again, it's an exalted, but like a bit debilitated Jupiter. And then the last one I have for you is Leo Varadkar. So Leo Varadkar was the last Prime Minister of Ireland. He left office just a few months ago. And this is, again, maybe more controversial because of, again, Jupiter exalted, retrograde, behaving as if it's in the third sign. And I'll bring up this, but it is a controversial thing because it wasn't made that public. It was something that went around on social media, but it wasn't reported in the news. So the one first controversial thing about it, of course, is that he was the first openly gay Irish Prime Minister. So that already is controversial. But he did say at one point in an interview that he was fascinated with religion, but he didn't seem to be a practicing, like, religious person. He didn't seem to have a practice, even though he's got an Indian heritage, brought up in Ireland. He didn't actually practice any particular religion, but he had this fascination, which is itself interesting when you consider this ninth house Jupiter. But this is the kind of controversial thing. So it is something that went out on social media. But what is interesting about it is the timing of it. And maybe this is the last point I want to make about Jupiter exalted, but like it's debilitated. He was in a nightclub in Dublin and he was caught on film, and everybody was filming him with their phones, as they do these days, kissing somebody other than his partner. And this happened just before he was about to take office again. So why would that be even interesting to know? Well, he was in Jupiter Dasha and he was about to take office, and Jupiter's there exalted, and you think, okay, this guy is just going up and up and up. But he couldn't help himself. Why would somebody who's about to take office in the country take a risk like that and be out in public and be intimate with somebody other than your partner as you're about to take office? I think if that were anyone else, if that happened in the US, for example, where a politician or a president was caught kissing somebody other than their wife, I think there would be uproar. There wasn't really an uproar about it. There was a lot of things said online, but essentially it's, again, just as if Jupiter is debilitated in the third sign, in the house of sex, in the third house, behaving like that. He couldn't help this. He had this desire. Remember, all planets, when they're in, and this is the most important thing, he's in a Jupiter Dasha. So the Graha Drishti of the planet is activated. So it desires the third house. It wants it. Even though it's exalted, it wants the opposite. So anyway, it occurred in Jupiter Dasha right before he took office. He actually left office in Jupiter Dasha Saturn Bhukti. And, you know, without getting into all of that, you can see Saturn here is the 10th house and then transiting his 4th house opposite. So you can see how it also ended his career in politics. And actually, he's stepping aside from politics completely now. So that's Leo Varadkar. And that is all I have for you. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this wonderful lecture. And this is very interesting and easy to understand. I think if anybody have any doubts or queries, they can post in the chat section or they can raise their hands. Yes, Suraj, yeah, you can ask.
Yeah, first of all, very nice and lucid lecture. Secondly, the example was of only 9th house Jupiter. Will this Jupiter also behave the same way if it's retrograde or so-called in any other house? Will that be applicable for the opposite house also?
Yes, I think it does. And from what I have learned from different astrologers, but I think that when it's exalted or debilitated and retrograde, it just behaves more extreme because exalted and debilitated planets are already more extreme, I think. You know, they're exalted or debilitated. So they're really high or low. And so when you put them retrograde in those, it's more obvious. But when it's in any sign and retrograde, it does behave as if it's in the opposite sign. It's just not going to show as much of an extreme.
Oh, thank you.
I think. Yeah. And I wanted to give these examples because I wanted to show extremes. Obviously, these are very extreme. But if you look at everyday charts and people who have, you know, Jupiter, and also from different house positions, even those ones, I specifically chose Scorpio because it would place Jupiter in the 3rd house, which is more extreme again. But if you look at it from Aries Lagna and look at it in terms of Jupiter exalted in the 4th house, but it goes to the 10th house, that's a very different story. But you can look at it in any house, really.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And we have received one query in the chat section that are we looking aspect of Jupiter in every house or just on the 3rd house? They are focusing on that debilitation house. Or can we take aspects like 5th aspect, 9th aspect, everything?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. When I look at a planet like that, I look at the drishti from its position. I know that some astrologers say you have to almost imagine that the planet has gone to the other sign, but it isn't actually in the other sign. So I don't think you can say it's got a drishti from a place it's not in. Yeah, that's what I would say.
No, thank you. Thank you for this explanation. And yeah, everybody is saying wonderful session. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Thank you once again. And everybody is appreciating your lecture. And technique is very easy, and I hope everybody can utilize this technique and they can further do more research on it for the other placements of like for other planets also, similarly like Jupiter. We can test those things.
Yeah, I think that's a good point as well, that you can do it obviously with all the planets and do it with exalted and debilitated planets and see when they're retrograde how it does work. It does work for all the planets.
Yeah, we all can collect these kind of horoscope maybe from Astro Data Bank and all. So we have these collections, so everybody can work on this system. Thank you one more. Thank you for joining us on Syndical Deployment.
Thank you for asking me as well. I enjoyed giving the presentation.
Thank you. Yeah.